Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And today we're looking at Jesus sending out the 72 messengers, or his 72 disciples that he had. And this comes from Luke 10, verses 1 through 16. And so, what I'm going to do today, I know I try to recap a lot of them, but this one's 16 verses. It's a lot to read. So, I want you to take the time to read this. If you need to pause the video and then go read it and then come back, that's fine. But yeah, go ahead and take the time to read this. I'm going to recap some of it. But what we see here in verse 1 is that, the Lord chose 72 people, um, or 72 other disciples, and sent them ahead in pairs to all the towns and places he visited. And so, one of the things I like is I start with this, right? One of the things I like to look for, especially with Luke, right? Luke has a focus on women. He didn't do it in this specific scenario when he talks about sending out the 72. But one of the things we miss a lot of time are what I call hidden women in the Bible, right? And I do not believe, and obviously I don't have 100%, 100% for sure this is all men or this is all women, but I believe in these 72 people that there were women that were sent out to help spread the message of Christ, because that would only make sense, because we see this in Paul's accounts and in other writings in the New Testament of where the women were with them as they went out to spread the message. And so I think that's the same thing that we would see here. It wasn't just, I don't believe it was just 72 men. Again, like I said, I don't have 100% fact on that, but I think if we look at the rest of the New Testament, see how they went out and how they went out, then I think that would par with that. So I like to look for the what I call sometimes the hidden women in the Bible. And so they were given these list of instructions, right? It says the harvest is great, but the workers are few. And so the things that we were asked to is to pray, and he gives them all these things. Don't take money with you when you enter someone's home. Like, give it a blessing. Don't move around from home to home, because obviously that could be insensitive and it could offend people, and then people start vying for your attention. If you enter a town that welcomes you, eat whatever it said. If heal the sick, do what it. But if a town refuses to welcome you, then you're to basically dust. It was a sign of, and not a sign of insult, but it was a sign of, basically you dust the dirt off your feet and you move on, right? And they're going to be abandoned to their faith. And it talks about how, they're going to be as wicked as Sodom. Or they would have been better off than Sodom was, as wicked as it was. And so we see all this this messaging and this theme that Jesus goes into, and basically he says in the end, in verse 16, anyone who accepts your message is also accepting me, and anyone who rejects your message is rejecting me, and anyone who rejects me is rejecting God who sent me. And so we need to remember that, right? It's hard not to take it personal when we're trying to work with someone or work with someone to believe in Christ, to take it personal if they reject. It's like, oh, I must have done something wrong. So no, Jesus is saying here, look, if they reject you, they're rejecting me, and if they're rejecting me, they're rejecting God. And so we need to remember that as we go through that. And so, we see here that far more than 12 people had been following Jesus up to this point, right? We know there's over 100 on the day of Pentecost, and so at this point he probably had several. I would say close to at least 120, I think, followers, maybe even more. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I would say 100 plus, if not more, people following him around. He always had large crowds following him around, but these were like dedicated people following and learning from him. We know the 12, right? And so here we know that he decided to send out 72. And so he sent these 72 out to prepare the towns for him visiting later. And so, we see this. And so it's neat. They weren't 100% prepared, right? And these disciples, right, they were not unique in their qualifications. It doesn't say, well, this person was unique. He just sent them out in pairs to do the work. And I think that's important, right? It's a lot easier to go with someone to do something like this instead of trying to do it on your own. And so I think that's with anything really, but I think especially with trying to spread the message of Christ. And the other thing here is they weren't better educated, more capable, or of higher status than Jesus's other followers. They were just his followers. And there were 72 of them that he sent out. And so what prepared them for the mission was that they had been equipped with Jesus's power and a vision, right, to reach all the people. And we have to remember that sometimes. Sometimes it's like we think in the I think sometimes we think in the back of our heads, it's like, oh well, this is really something for the preacher to do because he's got all the education, or this particular person who, this elder or this particular deacon, right? That, no, right? He didn't send out just the 12. He sent out 72, and not all of them are ready. Right? When he sent out some of the apostles, not all of them are ready. And that's the thing. If we wait until we're ready, then we're never going to be. We're never going to go out. And so we need to make sure that we're doing this. And so Christian service really has no unemployment, and we need to remember that as well. God has work for enough for everyone. Right? And again, it may look different. It may look different depending on your time period and where you're at and your age and all those things. It's going to look different, but there's service for everyone to have. And so Jesus encouraged disciples not to just do work, but to also pray for workers. And I think this is one thing we miss sometimes in the church. And as Christians, it's like we wish a lot. Man, I wish I had more people who would volunteer. I wish I had more people who would work or do this. And it's like, are you praying for that? Are you praying for God to send you more people? I'm guilty of this, right? I'll and I've been guilty of this. It's like, man, I wish I had more people to do this. And I'm sitting there thinking, I haven't even prayed to God for it, and he's sitting there commanding us to do it. And so this is something I think we're very lacking in, and we need to make sure this is a focus of our prayer, is that God will send more workers. He talks about the harvest being, ripe, the field being ripe for harvest. And so we need to make sure that we do that. And so part of every Christian's job is to pray for new workers and to help newcomers learn the ropes. And so, one of the ways is like if you pray for new workers, well, a lot of that was going to come through conversions, hopefully, people committing themselves to Christ and then working with them to become disciples and to work with Jesus. And so, one of the things that Jesus states here is that he's sending his disciples out as lambs among wolves. And that's very true. As Christians, right, we're not to be wolves. We are to be, the lambs is the symbolic. We are to be like sheep. Now, not sheep like in the sense of, you know, I don't know how I don't want to say this, kind of nice, but like just ignorant and dumb, right? But as lambs, as gentle people, right? As wolves are not gentle, right? Lambs are very gentle, and that's how we are to be. And I think almost like an innocence, right? Like to that as well. And so, we have to be careful because we are going to meet opposition. You're going to meet opposition, and so we need to make sure that we understand that and we are prepared for that as we go out into the world, because that's going to happen. And if you're not prepared for that, if you think this is going to be easy or just something that you can do with no issue and not really running really problems, that's not the way it's going to work. So we need to understand that there's going to be wolves out there and it can be dangerous. And so one of the things that Jesus directed was that they were to stay in one house, right? When they went into a town, go into that house and stay in that house. And that, shifting from house to house would offend families, right? If I invited someone or someone's coming to visit, I'm like, hey, man, why don't you come stay at my house? And he comes and stays at my house the next day. And then it's like, oh, well, someone, who has a nicer house in the congregation, maybe a little bit more money, can offer maybe a little bit better meals or something like that. And he goes, oh, well I'm going to go stay at their house. I'd be offended, right? So he's saying, look, when you go to one house, stay in that house. And this would also prevent families from, trying to compete for the disciples' presence. Some might think they were good. In other ones, right, some might think they're not good enough to hear the message. And so we need to make sure that we don't give that image of trying to be popular, trying to, I'm going to hang out with the most influential person and stuff like that. No, we don't need to show favoritism that way. There shouldn't become a competition for your attention in the church as a Christian. You should be pointing to Jesus, not, hey, look at me, or what can you do for me, the type of attitude. It should never be that way. We've got to be very careful that we don't do that. And so the disciples, right, if they appear not to appreciate the hospitality offered to them, then in the future also, so if other people saw this and saw the apostles doing this, then they might not accept Jesus when he followed him right there, right? When he came later on with his message, like, hey, man, your apostles were like trying to vie for attention and for position, and only would stay at the best people's houses. And what kind of attitude, what kind of, love is that? What kind of, what type of follow? That's no difference than what the Pharisees do. And so he did not want that to happen before he came. And so Jesus told his disciples to accept the hospitality offered them. And he also said, offer it, to accept it graciously, because their work entitled them to it. And that's another thing we have to make sure. It's like, if you're working for the Lord like this, right? And I'm not talking about like what we should be doing as Christians every day. I'm talking about this is, this is what this is your full-time or part-time, job, or however we wanted to classify it. Then, you are entitled to be compensated for your work. Jesus says this, it's written about later in the New Testament. Paul writes about it. And so, right, ministers of the good news deserve to be supported, and it's our responsibility to make sure they have what they need. I've seen it, and I haven't seen this in a while, but I know there's still some of this mentality in some of the churches that you need to keep your preacher poor to keep him humble, so he doesn't. And I think that's so unbiblical, right? I think that's so absolutely so unbiblical. I think that if you can bless your preacher and minister and his family, and maybe I'm a little biased because I grew up as a preacher's kid, but if you can bless them to the point where they don't have to struggle, then you should do that, right? And you should never have this attitude of, well, I didn't make that much as in my position or my profession, or so what, right? If the church is willing and able to supply the family with a livable, and I'm not talking about just enough to get screwed by, but enough to really get by, right, and to really bless them. And I think so. Now I'm not talking about multi-million-dollar salaries and $100,000 sports cars and a $1 million home, and now context, $1 million home in some locations is a 3-bedroom house. But what I'm saying, right? It's not we shouldn't be giving almost all the money from the church to the preacher so he can live it up and have all these wonderful nice things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about so they can live comfortably, right? If you can do it to where he doesn't have to get a second job, or maybe where his wife can stay home. Now again, that's up to them, right? That doesn't always have to be that way, but depending on what they want to do, and if they have that ability to do that, that would be awesome, right? And so that's what Jesus is talking about here, is as the church, we are to help support those who take care of us, minister to us. I think even in a sense, shepherd to us, right? I mean, that's a minister's job, pastor's job, elder's job, depending on how you separate those three. But, is to shepherd to us. And if they're doing that like they should, then, I'm not against compensating for them for that, especially those who are doing it full time. And like I said, make sure that they're well taken care of. And here's another reason why I'll say that, right? If we don't take care of our ministers and people from the outside see that, it's like, it's like, it's like, man, what, like I'm got this job at McDonald's and I'm making more than your preacher. Right now, again, I understand that in some contexts, some churches are small. You got 30 or 40 members, you can't afford to, maybe pay. But if they see from the outside this church or larger church, and it's like, man, his preachers barely get by, or he's having to take a second job. And like you say that's going to have an influence on the outside world of, well, man, if they don't really care for their preacher that much, then, what are they going to think of me, or how are they going to treat me? And so I think there's some things that we need to be aware of and play into that. And I think Jesus is speaking to that a little bit here. And again, like I said, I'm not talking about ridiculous stuff, right? I just don't, this is my personal, thing is, the whole like private airplanes, the whole $100,000 cars, that kind of stuff, that doesn't give the Christian religion a good look either. It's like there's a lot of poor people you can help out with that, and so there is a balance of what is appropriate and what looks appropriate, and we need to make sure we do that. Okay, I'm sorry I dove into that a little bit too much, but it's kind of a personal point for me growing up as a preacher's kid and hearing things like, well, the preacher should be poor, and that kind of stuff. And so I want to make sure we have the right attitude in that. And so finally, in the end of this, Jesus gives 2 rules for them to follow as they travel. They were to eat what was set before them, right? And that was because, in a lot of cultures, right, when you set food, if you didn't eat it, it was an insult to them. So you eat that. They were to accept hospitality without being picky. So that's number 1. And 2, they were to heal the sick. They were to go forward and heal the sick, because of they do that. They heal people. People will be willing to listen to the good news as Jesus comes along. And so this is kind of a summary of what Jesus, instructed the 72 to do as they went out. He kind of laid these rules out for them. And I think they're very good rules for us to apply today. Now, there's more that we can do. And I think, it's a different time. It's a different culture. And so some things are different. But I think most of the things in this are very reasonable things that we should pay attention to and use as we send people out and as we go out ourselves. And so tomorrow we're going to look at them returning and the results of what happens as they go out and some of their excitement in that. We'll see that tomorrow. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe to our channel, please go ahead and do so. Also, if you want to share this, if you find it beneficial, it would be helpful to share it out and help others as we go through this Bible study. Hopefully, helps you get a better look at the things going on in the ministries and of life of Jesus as we go through this. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching.